Thanks everyone for being here. I am just going to make sure that I'm actually live before I get started with my topic today. Okay. Just sitting here in YouTube, making sure that my picture shows up, and when it shows up, it's a go. All right, I'm live. Wonderful. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Josie Warren. I am the autoimmune expert. Welcome to my channel where we are sharing groundbreaking information about autoimmune diseases and also chronic illnesses. And for those of you who are new to my channel, I want you to get to know me just a little bit better. And what I want you to know about me is that autoimmune disease and chronic illness is an experience that I have personally lived. I'm over 10 years completely healthy and healed. Not in remission. I no longer have any of my chronic illnesses or autoimmune diseases. And this is the perspective I share from a person who is permanently healed. And I know what it's like going to the doctors or the functional medicine, the nutritionists, the alternative healers, and finding that no matter what kind of medication maybe you're taking or supplements or food diets that might temporarily quell those symptoms, that people like us continue to maintain our illnesses and oftentimes get worse. And that was the case with me. First autoimmune disease, rheumatoid arthritis, when I was 15. Was a very sick child with allergies. And as I progressed into my early 20s and then my late 20s, about every 6 months to a year, I was getting a new autoimmune disease. I also had chronic illnesses like anxiety, which we're going to be talking about today. I had depression, an eating disorder. I even struggled with some alcoholism when I was in my late teens. And so for those of you out there who are struggling, please know you've come to the right place to heal. I know what it's like. I know the experience, and the way out is actually ourselves. When I came 10 years ago to where I work today, we're called the New Life Center. My mentor, David Cope, helped me understand that the problem was actually me and my emotional state that was keeping my body stuck in fight or flight, that was causing the complete dysregulation of my body. When I resolved my own emotional state, I healed myself, and my body also healed permanently. This is the same method I take all of my students down, and we've been doing this work successfully, permanently healing chronic illness and autoimmune disease for over 20 years. What we do here, we are pioneering emotional medicine. So welcome. Now, today's topic is going to be one that is near and dear to my heart. It's one that I had, a chronic illness that I had for, I'd say, most of my life. I no longer have it anymore, and that is anxiety. And the topic of today's video is how I healed my anxiety naturally. And I will tell you that this is not going to be involving any kind of supplements, food diets, or mind-body interventions. So stay tuned. We're going to talk about why we as humans have anxiety and the simple solution to heal it. And know, interestingly, that there's one reason why we all have chronic anxiety. And so there's only going to be one solution. And this is how I healed and how the individuals I work with also heal. So first, we're going to define what is anxiety. Now, anxiety is the need to control the uncontrollable. So anxiety comes from the feeling of I am not in control of my life. And the things that I need to be in control of, I feel are happening to me, and that I am powerless to the effects of what is happening in my life. Does this sound familiar? I will say that everyone I work with who has autoimmune diseases also suffers from chronic anxiety. Now, I want to share first just a brief overview of my anxiety experience. As I shared, I lived with anxiety for most of my life. And for a lot of my life, I wouldn't actually have named it anxiety. As a kid, I just knew that I worried a lot. Things worried me, life scared me, and I was very nervous, a lot more nervous than my classmates. I first became aware that I had anxiety when I went to kindergarten, and a teacher pointed it out. She actually called my mom because she noticed that I was kind of shaking in class and had so much pressure that I was putting on myself that I was constantly asking to go use the bathroom. Now, from this point forward, it just feels like everything was scary to me, especially anything new, whether that was starting a new sport, moving schools, staying at friends' houses. I was always the kid that would call the mom in the middle of the night to have come pick her up. I had a really hard time being away from my parents when I was young. I really struggled with panic attacks, especially when it was I did competitive gymnastics, also public speaking in school. And as I got older through school, my anxiety really started kind of popping up around grades, trying to be a perfectionist and trying to do the very best I could. Anxiety around how I looked and my friends and my school groups. I have to say there's never really a time in my life growing up that I ever remember really feeling relaxed. I was always worried about something, kind of go up and down. Now, this anxiety that I had, it really popped when I was 15 and my dad passed away. We're going to talk more about that experience and what that caused in me later. And after my dad died, and then I started going down the road of autoimmune diseases, my anxiety just kept getting worse to the point where when I was in my 20s with my autoimmune diseases, I really didn't leave my house much. It was a big deal for me to ride my bike to a new neighborhood. I was kind of pulled away from my friends and my family and just really stayed in my apartment most days because that's where I felt I could control my life. That's where my life felt safe. And it became crippling. Living in this, I call it the tiny little circle, the tiny little box that I created because of how scary the world and the unknowns out there felt and how much I wasn't living at all due to my anxiety. It had all the power in my life. So please know out there, the people I meet here, we all have anxiety. Please know I understand you are not alone and you don't have to hide this or live with this anymore. I would never have shared any of this when I had my anxiety. I pretended that I was fine, but I was suffering and kind of dying on the inside. And there is a solution that I'll talk about in just a moment. Now, what I had was chronic anxiety. And chronic anxiety is the chronic feeling of not being in control of our lives. So where does this anxiety come from? Well, anxiety comes from unknowingly living in camp victim. In camp victim, we feel that our lives are happening to us and we are powerless to do anything about it. I liken it to the image of standing and a ball machine just hitting balls at us constantly, and those balls being the challenges of life, just constantly being bombarded, not being able to do anything about it. Because as humans, we unknowingly live in camp victim. The problem about this is that we lack the self-awareness to understand the extent that we live with chronic anxiety. This is why anxiety is so pervasive. It's really the lack of self-awareness that we have as humans living our lives through the lens of camp victim. Again, feeling life is happening to us. We have no control. We feel powerless to the events and circumstances of our life. And we have no self-awareness that there's any other way to live. So again, this ball machine experience, of course, this is the foundation of anxiety. And in anxiety, the bedrock of anxiety is worry. That same worry that I shared that I chronically had on that first day of kindergarten and beyond. And worry is spending time concerned with the effect of things in your life that you have no control over. And this worry comes from living in camp victim. Again, feeling like my life is happening to me and I'm powerless to do anything about it. Now, interestingly with worry, what I worry about is I don't worry about the thing that I have no control over. Worry actually comes from worrying about the impact that the thing will have on me and my life and how it could destabilize my life. Now, we're going to talk about destabilization. It's a huge component of anxiety and worry. Now, destabilize is the effect an event or circumstance has on a person's life, which disrupts their perceived control over their life. So, for example, let's take the current war in Iraq. It's not the war in Iraq I'm actually worried about, right? It's the impact the war in Iraq could have on my life and how the war in Iraq could destabilize my life. Not really worried about the war. It's about me. Take also, say you're a mom. Let's take the example of your kids riding their bicycles in the street. We're not really worried about the child's safety. What we're really worried about is the potential of them getting hurt and how that injury could destabilize our life. So a person who lives in a constant kind of chronic state of anxiety is in a constant underlying fear of something happening around the corner that will destabilize their experience. Now, does this sound familiar? It sure does for me. Even if I had a small window of time, maybe a day or two or a week or so where my life was relatively uneventful, I still had anxiety wondering when is this going to end? What's the next thing around the corner that will destabilize this kind of false straight line that I was trying to live in? Now, my greatest experience with anxiety and destabilization, this occurred with the kind of major destabilizing event, which was a major stressor, of my dad dying when I was 15 years old. After he died, my anxiety went through the roof. It was so chronic that I had teachers, adults, counselors comment that it was so strong they could feel it just sitting across from me, across a table. And so these professionals and adults in my life, they advocated for me to go get checked out and to try to put me on medication. That didn't work. But what happened is, I started pulling my hair out, my grades suffered, and my life from that huge destabilizing event forward became a series of panic attacks for the next 3 years. I had chronic anxiety, and this anxiety got so bad in my teens that I started to self-harm, and I also tried to commit suicide a few times. I really didn't want to be here because of how disrupted my life had become. I can still feel what a hard time that was for me when I was in high school, and how challenging it was that even the most well-meaning adults in my life had no idea how to help me. And I could now understand they probably also suffered from anxiety. But what I can now understand is that the death of my dad at that young age was a major stressor that destabilized in a major way my life. That thin line of predictability that I thought I had, that event created a sense that my safety was gone. And I had to recalibrate in my life who I was in our household. And it shook up our finances, I'll tell you that, and just the unknowns without having my dad, who I love so much, leading me, guiding me, and really being the head of our household. So from that point, I really felt like the rug was pulled out underneath me, and the anxiety I felt was so palpable, it was almost unlivable because that event destabilized my experience. So the problem is that a person with anxiety, like I had, we have this really constant need that we want to try to make our life as predictable and as controlled and as stable as possible. This thin, straight line that has no blips, always known, very, very comfortable. And this thin line that we try to live, it actually fights against the very nature of how life actually is. It's like trying to live in a very unnatural way, which I will speak more to in a moment. So when unpredictable events happen in our life, that thin line, it causes blips in our line. That can be very, very stressful. It destabilizes the kind of false thin line. And this destabilization, that unrealistic thin line, it pushes us out of our comfort zone. This is a comfort zone. And it's not a healthy thing, very unhealthy. This is where anxiety comes from. So those destabilizing events pushes out our comfort zone. We have to recalibrate. And like myself, quite frankly, I'd freak out every time. Anytime there was change, anytime there was something new, time there was something that I went through that I didn't feel pretty much completely prepared for, which was many things. There was a blip, and my anxiety kind of went through the roof. So people like myself with anxiety, we are people who have kind of an unending need to stabilize our life, to live the thin line, trying to make our life always predictable, always known. And this just is not the way that life works. So when destabilizing events happen, like I had the major one with my dad dying, it creates huge blips. So grief and loss in particular, major blips for those of us who are unfortunately trying to live in this unnatural thin line. And what happens when we have these major destabilizing events that cause the big blips is that's what causes panic attacks. And panic attacks can be anywhere from mild to severe. And we can see here they're always caused by the degree of destabilizing events. So what is the solution to this? Because I tell you, I don't know what I would have done if I would have continued forth with the level of anxiety I was living with. I tried natural things. I always had tinctures of passion flower with me at all times. I had calming gummies. I was doing the magnesium, trying the tryptophan. I mean, you name it. I was trying to find a way out of this just kind of chaotic cloud of anxiety, and nothing was working. And I was a therapist, also a licensed therapist, and couldn't even help myself. Let's be frank. So the solution to anxiety, the first step, and this is a huge one, is just the awareness that there is another way to live our lives, that there's another road to take, that we can actually have a life that does not have chronic worry, fear of life, aka anxiety. And then the next step is then to move into this new way of life. And what that looks like is it's moving out of camp victim, right? The camp that we've unknowingly been living in, where chronic anxiety lives and it breeds and grows, and moving into the other way of living that we never knew existed. And this is really the secret here. It's moving into camp take responsibility. Camp take responsibility. So it's getting out of camp victim, of the false idea that things in my life are happening to me that shouldn't be happening to me, right? Falsely thinking that my life is one of major hardship. And I know this one for me, thinking that my life isn't supposed to look like this, that the life I have or the life I've had, it shouldn't be like this, that it's not fair. So this is all coming from the human obsession to live life in this, again, this thin, controlled line, which goes against the very nature of the way life is. So in Camp Take Responsibility, we begin to have the awareness that, wait, I'm putting my efforts and energy into the wrong thing. This is impossible in life. This is when we live in Camp Victim. And in Camp Take Responsibility, I realize, oh, I can't control the events and circumstances that happen out here, right? We can't control our losses. We can't control the wars. We can't control, the changes in the financial market or losing jobs or starting new ones. And I mean, there are so many things that we can't control in our life. So we realize, oh, I can only control myself, and we stop trying to control life like this. And we embrace the real picture of life, which is life is not and can never be this. Life actually looks like this. I like to say life is like the mountains. And with all of those highs and lows and peaks and valleys, a series of stressors throughout our life, series of circumstances and events. And we embrace that and do our best in that. That is can't take responsibility. Again, trying to make this and push it into this is where anxiety comes from. And can we see what illogical thinking and that is? I so wish that someone would have taught this to me when I was like in, let's say, middle school or high school, helping me understand that I was trying to live kind of an impossible way of life, that there was no way out. So in Camp Take Responsibility, I love this concept. There lives a concept called the reality of life. Now, the reality of life is an anxiety buster. For me, it was a complete game changer. And the reality of life is knowing that our life is a series of minor and major stressors. And this is the reality of the human lifespan. The human lifespan. So, for example, let's just take an average human life. And I'm just an average human life of someone who lives here in the United States. And we're going to go through their average human life and be looking at some of these are going to be more major stressors that an average human experiences in a lifespan. And we're going to do it chronologically. So one of the early ones would be a sibling being born. Then moving homes. Starting kindergarten. Having parents that fight. A pet dying. A grandparent dying. Now, as we're going through these are the stressors that happen often before someone even starts high school. Isn't that interesting? Now let's go into high school. That's a stressor. You start high school. You have your first big romantic breakup. You don't make the sports team or the theater. You take your SATs or ACTs and the stress of taking those and studying for those. And then the stressor of either going off to college or just leaving home and starting your life outside of the house you grew up in. Now, we're going to stop right here. And here's the fascinating thing. This is a person that's only probably about 19 years old right now. And look at all the stressors we experience, pretty much before the age of 19. All of these major stressors. And here's the thing. We could continue forth and investigating every decade of an average person's life and come up with a list of major stressors. So here's what I want you to take away from this. If we circled up a group of 100 people, how many of these people would raise their hands when I shared this list up to the age of 19 that they had experienced that? How many would raise their hand? Here's the interesting thing. Most all of them would. Most all of them would. So this is the reality of life. And this helped me so much with that major stressor that I went through, the loss of my dad when I was 15 years old. For so long, I lived in chronic anxiety and deep emotional pain, feeling that he shouldn't have died, that the event was very traumatic, that it was, no one understood the unique pieces of it, that, I knew other kids who's lost parents, but they didn't die like my dad did. I'd always, he was in a coma. There was alcohol. There was, drugs there. I just tried everything I could to make my experience different and special and unique. And reality of life gave me a whole new perspective. And with the reality of life, I understood in a very supportive way, hey, Josie, you're not special. Not only do every person have parents that will die and who do pass, but even when I investigate my semi-close friend group, I would say in high school, I had about 3 or 4 other friends lose a dad in that same time in high school. Even one of my best friends lost her dad that next year. It is not an uncommon event. And the challenging road that I chose to go on of self-harm and trying to commit suicide and unhealthy behaviors and things of that nature, not everybody went down that road. I had friends whose dad died, and they used it to become stronger and to do better in school and to really become something. So I could see, not only was it not the cause of the life that I had afterwards, but it really wasn't unique or special. So that is the reality of life. It is realizing that your life is actually not unique to you. And the stressors and the challenges that you go through are common. And most are even predictable, right? Just like the list that I shared with you of all the predictable common stressors that most people go through before the age of 19. So the reality of life is so beautiful because what it does, it squashes the concept that my life is happening to me, this belief that things are happening to me, and that I'm not in control of my life, and that my life shouldn't look the way that it does, and the stressors and the hardships shouldn't happen to me, poor me, right? This is camp victim. So anxious people with chronic anxiety, these are people, we live in camp victim. And the problem is we continue to want to make our life like this. I hope we've learned today that this is impossible. This is where anxiety is coming from, trying to make your life predictable and known. So a person free of chronic anxiety, this is the simple cure. This is how I healed my anxiety naturally. And what you do is you realize there's another way to live. And that new way to live is embracing the reality of life. That life will never be this, so we stop putting our energy and focus into that. And we realize that life is like the mountains, and everyone's life is like the mountains. A series of up and down, a series of actually mostly predictable stressors through our human lifespan. And this is the reality of life, the reality of the human experience. It was so refreshing for me to realize that what I had gone through in my life, it wasn't a Josie experience, right? And it wasn't even a female experience or a Colorado experience where I grew up, that these were human experiences. This is what we go through as humans. So that we realize, resolving our anxiety, we realize that we can't control these events that happen to us. The stressors, meaning the grief and losses, the disappointments, the challenges that are involved usually with our family, children, spouse and work, the divorces, the challenges raising your kids, financial challenges, retirement issues, moving, etc. We can't control these events, but we can control our response to these events. When we realize we can control our response to the events and circumstances of our life, we move into camp take responsibility. And we take back our power, and we take back our control, and we no longer have anxiety. And this was 100% my experience. I have empathy for myself now. I can understand why I lived so terrified, because the experience I had of my life up until I understood the reality of life, is I was in a kind of a runaway car in the passenger seat of my life, terrified of where this car was going, having no control over my life, terrified that it was going to crash basically at any moment and roll over. And when I understood the reality of life, I realized I had all the power and control in the world to choose my responses to my challenges. I chose how I respond, and how I respond determines the life I have. From that, I realized that I determine the life I have, not what I've been through, not the stressors, not my dad passing. That wasn't going to define me. I define me for how I choose to respond to it. And that resolved that chronic state of anxiety that I experienced, of feeling so out of control, so worried, so nervous, because I had me. And I can always, again, choose my response. And I'm going to end this video with a quote that really encapsulates everything we talked about today, and especially what we just spoke about. And it's a quote by Viktor Frankl. I think he was such an incredible human being. And at any time I start finding myself feeling sorry for myself, I think of Viktor Frankl. Not only a famed psychiatrist, he was a survivor of the worst concentration camp of the Holocaust, Auschwitz, and he's also the father of logotherapy. And he's the author of Man's Search for Meaning. If you want to understand what it really looks like to be in control of your experience when everything in your life is taken away, please read Man's Search for Meaning. And Viktor Frankl once said that between a stimuli and a response, there is a gap. And in that gap is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies growth and freedom. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm going to hop over to the chat real quick, and great. Well, just thank you so much for being here. And please know, if you are out there and you have anxiety like I did, or maybe you have depression as well, which is very common. We usually have both. You don't have to live with it anymore. You don't have to hide it. You don't have to try to manage it or force it away or think it away. You can permanently heal from it. And that's actually what my expertise is. Our expertise here, we permanently heal chronic illnesses like anxiety and depression, and also autoimmune diseases. And what we have is the path that I took. If you're learning, well, how do I put this into action? How do I actually do this? We have a step-by-step program, 13-week online educational programs. They are self-guided. You heal yourself in these programs, and it's the autoimmune healing program. And for those with anxiety, it's going to be the chronic illness healing program. These programs teach you how to embrace the reality of life, how to use what you've gone through and what you are going through to become strong and resilient within yourself, to take back your power and your control, and to know that it's you and your response that determines your life and determines your health. And we find anxiety is a condition that actually heals very quickly in our programs, and usually about 3 months or less. It goes away, like evaporates, and the sun shines, as I like to say, once again. So if you're interested in either of these programs, then please apply for a complimentary course consultation with me. You will find the link down below. And if you're not quite ready for a course consultation with me, but you're a little more curious about what we do, I have a link for my free 101 course on autoimmune diseases and chronic illnesses like anxiety. The link to watch is also down below. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much.